Hey friends, welcome back. Before we dive in, I just want to take a second to say, if you enjoy what I do here, your support means the world. So if you feel like it, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and maybe even share this with someone who also can't sleep without a little history in their life. And while you're here, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from, and what time is it for you right now? I love knowing if you're tuning in during a late night scroll, a lazy afternoon, or somewhere in between. Now, tonight's journey takes us back to one of the most legendary what-ifs in human history, a place where ambition, curiosity, and a suspicious number of papyrus scrolls all came together, the Library of Alexandria. Was it a treasure trove of lost wisdom, a cautionary tale, or maybe the greatest ancient version of "Oops, I dropped the entire internet"? Let's find out. Imagine the world's biggest Google search history, but on papyrus. The Library of Alexandria was basically the ancient version of the internet, except instead of cat memes and conspiracy theories, it held priceless scrolls on math, medicine, astronomy, and probably recipes for wine stronger than anything you've ever had. And then, poof, gone, burned, misplaced, mismanaged, depending on which ancient gossip you believe. One day humanity had a treasure chest of knowledge, the next day it was like someone rage quit and hit delete history. So the big question is, what did we lose? The cure for diseases, secret star maps, or maybe just 50 slightly different versions of how to build a pyramid for dummies? Picture this. Egypt, around 300 BCE. The sand is hot, the camels are grumpy, and Alexander the Great has just died after running across the known world like an over-caffeinated marathon runner. His generals are left playing a messy game of Risk with real armies, carving up his empire into bite-sized chunks. One of those generals, Ptolemy Soter, strolls into Egypt and says, "Nice pyramids, shame about the lack of scrolls. Let's fix that." Boom. That's the seed that would eventually grow into the greatest library the ancient world had ever seen. Now, you have to understand the vibe of Alexandria. This wasn't some sleepy Nile-side town. This was the Instagram capital of the ancient world, founded by Alexander himself, because of course he named it after himself. Alexander was basically the guy who insists on tagging himself in every group photo. Alexandria quickly became the it city. It had a shiny new lighthouse, the Pharaohs, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It had a massive harbor where trade ships poured in like tourists at an all-inclusive buffet. And in the middle of this booming metropolis, the Ptolemaic kings decided they wanted something more, not just wealth, but wisdom. Their dream? To collect every single piece of knowledge on Earth and stash it in one mega library. It's the most ambitious hoarding project in history. Forget Pokemon cards. These guys wanted all the scrolls. If the world had writing on it, they wanted it. Now, credit where it's due. The Ptolemies weren't dumb. They knew that knowledge was power, and not just the "I can pass my exams" kind of power. We're talking real power. Navigation charts to outsail your enemies. Medical treatises to keep your soldiers alive when everyone else was still treating headaches with trepanning. Political philosophies to justify why your dynasty deserved to rule Egypt despite the fact that, well, you weren't Egyptian. So the Ptolemies put out the word, Alexandria will be the brain of the world. Scholars, poets, philosophers, mathematicians. If you're smart, come hang out here. They offered food, stipends, a place to stay, and most importantly, a giant audience for your ideas. If you were a nerd in 300 BCE, Alexandria was Comic-Con, Burning Man, and Harvard all rolled into one. But here's the catch. How do you actually get the knowledge? It's not like the ancient world had PDF downloads. You couldn't just slide into Babylon's DMs and ask for a Dropbox link to their star charts. That's when the Ptolemies came up with their genius, or evil, depending on your perspective, plan. They instructed their officials, any ship that docks in Alexandria must hand over every book on board. Our scribes will copy it. The original stays with us. The ship captain gets the knockoff. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the earliest recorded case of state-sponsored piracy. Imagine pulling into port with your personal diary and the customs agent says, "Cool story, bro, we're taking it." The scribes who worked in the library became scroll replication machines. Their whole job was to copy texts, fast and accurately. If TikTok existed back then, these guys would have been viral under the hashtag #JashSpeedScribes. And while it might sound unfair to the original owners from the Ptolemies' perspective, This was brilliant. Why let knowledge leave when you can keep it locked up in your treasure vault of papyrus? Of course, the Ptolemies didn't stop at ship scrolling. They sent agents out like knowledge bounty hunters, scouring Greece, Mesopotamia, India, anywhere words were scratched on parchment, papyrus, or clay. Their mission, bring it back. Think Indiana Jones, but instead of golden idols, they're after Aristotle's grocery list. And so, the Library of Alexandria was born, a place where hundreds of thousands of scrolls piled up like an endless buffet of human curiosity. It wasn't just a building, it was part of a larger complex called the Mauseon, basically the world's first research institute. You had scholars living there, studying, debating, eating, probably arguing over who left their scrolls on the wrong shelf. This was not some quiet reading room. It was alive, buzzing, like an ancient think tank fueled by olive oil and ego. Now, imagine walking through those halls, shelf after shelf of papyrus rolls, each one labeled with titles like On the Nature of the Universe, Medicine of Hippocrates, A Guide to Egyptian Spells You Definitely Shouldn't Try at Home. The smell of ink and papyrus fills the air. Everywhere, men in togas are hunched over, scribbling, muttering, and occasionally shouting at each other in Greek. This is the birthplace of scientific method, critical thought, and academic rivalries so petty they'd make Twitter look mature. The scope of their ambition was insane. One ancient estimate claimed the library aimed to hold 500,000 scrolls. That's not just a collection, that's a borderline obsession. To put it in modern terms, the Library of Alexandria was trying to be both Wikipedia and the Library of Congress, except with worse fire insurance. But of course, the moment you decide to hoard all the world's knowledge in one place, you're basically tempting fate. Fires, wars, accidents. History is cruel to big egos and big projects, and the library's story is as much about what it had as what it lost. Still, in these early years, it was a shining symbol. Alexandria wasn't just a city of trade and lighthouses anymore. It was a city of ideas, where kings played patron to geniuses, and where the dream of bottling up all human wisdom seemed, for a brief, glorious moment, possible. But the thing about ambition is, it tends to make enemies. And as Alexandria grew fat on knowledge, the rest of the world began to notice. Some admired it, some resented it, and some wanted to take it all back. Because one day, a Roman general named Julius Caesar would find himself in Alexandria. And let's just say, history doesn't mix well with open flames and a lot of dry papyrus. So there it was, the Library of Alexandria, freshly built, glittering with ambition, and smelling like a mixture of papyrus dust and unwashed philosophers. It had the patronage of kings, the brains of the ancient world, and one simple mission: collect everything written by human hands, no matter how, no matter where. Now, when I say collect, don't picture friendly librarians saying, "Oh, hello traveler, would you mind donating your scroll of Homer's Iliad for the sake of universal knowledge?" No. Alexandria didn't ask. Alexandria took. Here's how it worked. Ships rolled into the great harbor of Alexandria from every corner of the Mediterranean. Crews expected to unload grain, spices, and maybe a few bored chickens. Instead, they got a warm Egyptian welcome. "Hello, sailor. Welcome to Alexandria. Please hand over every book on board." Yes, the famous policy of seize and copy. The royal officials, imagine customs officers with much fancier sandals, would comb through the ship, take any scrolls, codices, or tablets they found, and march them straight to the scribes. The owners, they didn't get their texts back, at least not the originals. They got copies, handwritten copies. And let's be honest, in the ancient world, quality control wasn't always stellar. You might sail in with a pristine original copy of Aristotle, and sail out with something like Aristotle's tips for goat grooming. This wasn't charity, folks. It was intellectual theft, with the royal seal of approval. Imagine docking in Los Angeles today, only for someone to raid your laptop and say, "Don't worry, we'll clone your hard drive, keep the original, and give you back a slightly corrupted file." And the Ptolemies didn't apologize for this. They were proud. In fact, they labeled these seized originals as "from the ships," a whole category in their collection. To the Ptolemies, this wasn't piracy. This was cultural superiority. Knowledge wasn't meant to be shared, it was meant to be owned. But let's pause for a moment. Was it effective? Absolutely. Within a few decades, Alexandria had assembled a collection so massive that it put every other library of the ancient world to shame. Pergamon, Athens, even old Babylon couldn't compete. Alexandria was the iCloud of the ancient world, except without the part where you forget your password. And they didn't stop with ships. The Ptolemies also sent out agents on book-buying missions. These were like undercover operatives of scroll smuggling. They traveled across the Mediterranean, showing up in Greek city-states and saying things like, "Nice temple. Also, I heard you've got some juicy manuscripts in the back. Care to sell?" One of the juiciest stories involves Athens. The Athenians still had the prized official manuscripts of their tragedies: Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. These were civic treasures. The Ptolemies, of course, wanted them. Athens agreed to loan the manuscripts in exchange for a massive deposit of silver. Alexandria got the manuscripts, promised to return them, and then didn't. Instead, they sent back copies. Essentially, the Ptolemies pulled the most expensive library late fee in history. And here's the kicker. The Athenians knew they'd been scammed, but what could they do? Egypt was powerful, rich, and smug. The Ptolemies got away with intellectual daylight robbery. And Athens, they got stuck with knockoffs and no refund. Meanwhile, inside Alexandria, the collection ballooned. The scribes were working overtime, bent over scrolls by lamplight, churning out copies faster than a medieval monk on Red Bull. The scale was insane. Ancient sources throw around numbers like 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls. Now, was that exaggerated? Maybe. Ancient writers loved big round numbers. But even if we take the lower estimate, this was still mind-boggling for the time. No other city came close. And think about what those scrolls contained. We're not just talking Homer and Hesiod. We're talking Babylonian astronomy, Egyptian medical papyri, Indian treatises on numbers, Phoenician histories, Hebrew scriptures, and maybe even weird odds and ends like cookbooks, travel guides, or scrolls that definitely aren't cursed but also don't open after midnight. The library became a sort of intellectual black hole. Anything that came near it got sucked in and never left, which was great for Alexandria, less great for everyone else. But oh, it wasn't all smooth sailing, because when you hoard that much knowledge, you don't just make friends, you make rivals. Enter Pergamon. Ah, Pergamon, the upstart. Located in modern-day Turkey, Pergamon's kings decided they too wanted a giant library. They even hired their own scholars and scribes to compete with Alexandria. And let me tell you, this was not a polite rivalry. This was academic beef. Imagine Harvard and Oxford having a rap battle, but instead of lyrics, they're slinging scrolls. In fact, the rivalry got so heated that, according to one story, the Ptolemies tried to sabotage Pergamon by cutting off their supply of papyrus. No papyrus, no scrolls. Problem solved. But Pergamon wasn't about to fold. Instead, they innovated. They turned to animal skins, parchment, which, ironically, would outlast papyrus by centuries. So in trying to crush their rivals, Alexandria may have accidentally helped invent one of history's most durable writing materials. Oops. Still, Alexandria remained king. Pergamon grew, but the Library of Alexandria was the standard. It wasn't just the collection, it was the prestige. To be a scholar invited to Alexandria was like winning the Nobel Prize of the ancient world. You lived in the Mouseion, dined with other intellectuals, and had access to the greatest stash of knowledge humanity had ever hoarded in one place. But here's where the irony creeps in. The very thing that made Alexandria powerful, its greed for knowledge, also made it vulnerable. The more you hoard, the more you risk losing. And unlike Pergamon with its parchment, Alexandria's treasure was fragile. Papyrus burns, it molds, it decays. It doesn't take much, a spark, a flood, an angry mob, to turn centuries of human progress into ash. And history, being the cruel prankster it is, would eventually test just how flame-retardant this mega-library really was. Spoiler, not very. Because one day, during a messy little conflict involving Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, and a lot of Roman ships, the harbor of Alexandria would become a battleground. And when fire meets papyrus, well, let's just say the world learned the hard way what happens when you hoard scrolls without a fire extinguisher. Alright, so we've established that the Library of Alexandria wasn't just a library, it was an obsession. Scroll hoarding? Check. International book piracy? Double check. Scamming Athens out of their sacred plays? Oh, absolutely. But the library wasn't just about collecting knowledge, it was about using it. And that's where Alexandria became more than a warehouse of dusty papyrus. It became the ancient world's nerd paradise. Let's set the scene. You walk through the great halls of the Mausion, the temple of the muses that housed the library. Sunlight filters in through colonnades, the air buzzing with conversation in Greek, Egyptian, and the occasional Babylonian. Scribes scuttle past with stacks of scrolls. Philosophers argue so loudly you'd think they were auditioning for an ancient reality show called Keeping Up with the Stoics. This wasn't your average library with quiet please signs. This was an academic theme park. The Mausion wasn't just shelves of scrolls, it was a whole research institute. Think of it as the world's first university campus. Scholars lived there, ate there, debated there, probably complained about cafeteria food there, and the Ptolemies funded it all. The kings gave scholars stipends, free housing, and meals. The ancient version of tenure, but with slightly more risk of assassination. Who came here? Oh, only the biggest brains of antiquity. You had Euclid, the father of geometry, strutting around with his compass, probably annoying everyone by proving theorems at dinner. You had Eratosthenes, who famously calculated the circumference of the Earth with nothing more than a stick, a shadow, and some serious math swagger. Spoiler. He got it almost exactly right, 2,000 years before anyone sailed around to check. Then there was Herophilos, a physician who dissected human bodies, legally, to study anatomy. Most people at the time were like, that's gross. But he was like, I just discovered the brain controls the body. You're welcome. Alexandria was one of the few places where that kind of groundbreaking, slightly creepy research could actually happen. And let's not forget Archimedes popping in from Syracuse, scribbling formulas about levers, pulleys, and death rays. Rumor has it he once set Roman ships on fire with mirrors, though historians debate whether he invented ancient laser beams or just gave sailors really bad sunburns. Either way, his kind of eccentric genius thrived in Alexandria's atmosphere. But wait, there's more. Poetry nerds, historians, grammarians. They all flocked here. The library employed entire teams of scholars to catalog scrolls, creating one of the first known library classification systems. Imagine them carefully labeling scrolls. On Astronomy, Volume 17, or Definitely Not Cursed, Do Not Open. The great poet Callimachus was even tasked with organizing it all. He created the Pinnaces, basically a massive index of all works in the library. Picture the world's first Dewey Decimal System, except written on papyrus and maintained by a cranky poet who probably muttered about misshelved scrolls. Without Callimachus, scholars would have been drowning in an ocean of unlabeled papyrus rolls like contestants in a very boring episode of Hoarders. And it wasn't just Greek stuff. Alexandria was multicultural to its core. Remember, this was a city built by a Macedonian conqueror, ruled by Greek pharaohs, sitting in Egypt, trading with half the known world. So inside the library, you'd find texts in Greek, Egyptian, Babylonian, Hebrew, even Sanskrit. The Ptolemies weren't picky. If it had words, they wanted it. Alexandria was like the ancient internet, messy, multilingual, full of both brilliance and nonsense. Now, let's talk about daily life for these brainiacs. Imagine living in a scholarly commune. You'd wake up, grab some bread and olives, and head off to study star charts or poke around in anatomy. Around lunchtime, you'd argue with a Stoic philosopher about whether emotions are pointless or just mildly inconvenient. Afternoon, maybe translate some obscure Babylonian text that nobody else understands. Evening, wine, debates, and perhaps a lecture on why geometry is sexy. Of course, the egos were enormous. Get that many geniuses in one place, and it's bound to get messy. Scholars argued over interpretations, plagiarized each other's work, and threw shade disguised as philosophy. Ancient academia had all the drama of modern Twitter beefs, except written on parchment. Somewhere in those halls, two scholars were definitely yelling, "You didn't cite me properly, you papyrus thief." But here's the kicker. For all their rivalries, what these people were doing was revolutionary. They weren't just memorizing Homer and calling it a day. They were experimenting, classifying, inventing methods of inquiry. This was the cradle of what we now call the scientific method. Observation, hypothesis, testing. It wasn't fully formed yet, but the seeds were planted. And they were planted in Alexandria's soil. It's hard to overstate how wild this was. Most of the world at the time still relied on oral tradition or tiny local archives. Meanwhile, Alexandria was like, hold my amphora, we're building a universal brain. And the kings encouraged it. Not out of pure altruism, of course. Knowledge meant power. If Alexandria could crack better navigation, they could control trade routes. If their doctors could cure diseases, their armies stayed healthy. If they could preserve histories, they could legitimize their rule. The Ptolemies weren't running a charity, they were running the ultimate state-funded think tank. And for a while, it worked. Alexandria sparkled as the intellectual jewel of the Mediterranean. Pilgrims came not just for the lighthouse, but for the scrolls. Scholars bragged if they got to study there. And in those grand halls, human knowledge expanded in ways that would echo for centuries. Because just as Alexandria reached its golden age of nerd glory, a series of events, some accidental, some deliberate, would begin the long, tragic unraveling of its precious scrolls. And the first hint of trouble? Well, it involved Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, and a fire that got very, very out of hand. Okay, so we've set the stage. The Library of Alexandria is overflowing with scrolls. Scholars are arguing in Greek. Philosophers are dissecting human bodies like they're auditioning for CSI, Egypt. Mathematicians are proving theorems at dinner parties. It's nerd heaven. But let's ask the obvious question, what was actually inside those scrolls? Well, grab a snack because this is where things get juicy and tragic. First, let's start with the things we know were probably there. Remember, the library was a vacuum cleaner sucking up texts from everywhere. So, for sure, it had Greek classics, Homer, Hesiod, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes, all the drama, comedy, and epic poetry your toga-loving heart could desire. Philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, Stoics, Epicureans, maybe even early drafts of some bizarre 101 Ways to Annoy Your Students with Riddles scroll. Mathematics, Euclid's Elements almost certainly lived there. Archimedes' works? Likely. The kind of texts where you stare at a diagram for 3 hours before realizing geometry hates you. Medicine, Hippocrates and his followers. Which means scrolls full of fascinating treatments like eat garlic, it cures everything, and just don't anger the gods. That's just the Greek stuff. The library wasn't picky. If you wrote it, they wanted it, which means Alexandria became a cultural melting pot of knowledge. Imagine wandering through the shelves. Egyptian medical papyri, some dating back 1,000 years before the library even existed. They had recipes, surgeries, and terrifying instructions like, insert crocodile dung here. Yes, ancient Egyptian contraceptives were creative. Babylonian astronomy records, thousands of years of sky watching, predicting eclipses, and noting which stars mean good harvests and which mean, oh no, the gods are angry again. Hebrew texts, translations of Jewish scripture, were supposedly made here, producing what we call the Septuagint. Picture rabbis and Greek scholars squinting at each other across scrolls, muttering, that's not what it means. Indian mathematics and medicine, including early ideas about zero, numbers, and surgical techniques. Imagine an Alexandrian doctor reading, cut here to remove cataract, and muttering, wait, you can fix blindness. Phoenician histories and myths, now totally lost. We only know scraps from later writers. These might have been in Alexandria, now turned to dust. Basically, the library was the hard drive of humanity. Everything people knew, or thought they knew, was shoved into those walls. Here's where it gets really fun. The library wasn't just about what we know it had. It's about what we suspect it had, or wish it had. Some say it held lost plays of Sophocles and Euripides. We've got maybe a dozen tragedies today. They wrote hundreds. The rest? Probably sitting in Alexandria waiting to be rediscovered. Until they weren't. Aristotle's missing works. He wrote treatises we've never seen. Whole books on comedy, love, and maybe his private notes on how much Plato annoyed him. Gone. Maps of the world. Imagine detailed charts of coastlines, islands, maybe even whispers of lands across the Atlantic. Did someone in Alexandria sketch the Americas centuries early? Conspiracy theorists would like to think so. Advanced science. Some claim inventions like steam engines, automata, or medicine centuries ahead of their time were documented there. If true, humanity basically had cheat codes for civilization and then lost them. Was all of this really there? Hard to say. Ancient writers love to romanticize. But the idea that somewhere in those shelves lay the cure for diseases, missing epics, or star charts mapping the heavens is both thrilling and depressing. Of course, not everything was groundbreaking. Let's not pretend every scroll was How to Build a Spaceship 101. The library must have had plenty of boring or downright ridiculous entries too. Imagine 15 uses for goat fat, horoscopes for cats, DIY pyramid maintenance, a homeowner's guide. Why My Neighbor Sucks, Volume 3. It wasn't all brilliance. Some of it was ancient nonsense. But even nonsense tells us about the world. And losing that nonsense means we'll never know just how weird people got about goats. Here's the real punch. The library wasn't just about storage. It was about synthesis. You had Babylonian star charts sitting next to Greek geometry, Indian medicine, and Egyptian magic spells. For the first time, cultures could collide on paper. Scholars compared, translated, debated. Knowledge wasn't just preserved, it was cross-pollinated. That's why Alexandria was so special. It wasn't just hoarding scrolls, it was creating a space where ideas could mate, mutate, and evolve into something greater. Without that, the world would have been a lot slower on the uptake. And this is why the destruction of the library hurts so much. It wasn't just some books burned. It was like deleting the save file of human civilization. Imagine if one day the internet just vanished, with no backups. No Wikipedia, no memes, no cat videos, gone. That's how catastrophic the loss feels. Think about it. Maybe cures for diseases were in there. Maybe advanced tech. Maybe entire histories of civilizations we barely know existed. It's like humanity once held all the cheat codes, and then dropped them into the fireplace. And speaking of fire, oh boy, because what comes next is the part where history starts pointing fingers. Who burned the Library of Alexandria? Julius Caesar, early Christians, Caliph Omar, or was it just a series of accidents in the worst game of hot potato ever? Get ready, because part 5 is all about the blame game. So here we are, standing in the middle of the greatest library the world has ever seen, looking at all these scrolls stacked like ancient Jenga blocks, and the big question pops into your head. So who burned it down? This, my friend, is where history gets messy, because if you ask 10 historians when and how the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, you'll probably get 11 different answers, plus a sigh and maybe a lecture about how we romanticize the past too much. The truth is, the library didn't just go down in one dramatic blaze like some Hollywood movie. No single villain twirled a mustache, lit a torch, and said, "Behold, I destroy wisdom." The library's death was slow, complicated, and honestly kind of embarrassing for humanity. But let's start with the juiciest candidate, Julius Caesar. It's 48 BCE. Caesar's in Alexandria, caught up in a civil war. He's not supposed to be there writing history books. He's supposed to be securing his power after chasing Pompey across the Mediterranean. And of course, being Caesar, he immediately gets himself tangled in the palace politics of Egypt. Enter Cleopatra. Yes, that Cleopatra. Queen of Egypt, smarter than half the Senate, fashion icon, snake enthusiast. Caesar meets her, sparks fly, and suddenly the man who should be focusing on Roman politics is distracted by eyeliner and ambition. Now, things get heated. Literally. Caesar finds himself surrounded by enemy ships in Alexandria's harbor. So what does he do? He sets the harbor on fire to destroy the fleet. Effective military tactic? Sure. Problem. Alexandria's harbor was right next to Alexandria's warehouses, which were right next to Alexandria's granaries, which, surprise, were right next to where a good chunk of the library's scrolls were being stored. You can almost hear the scholars screaming, "Not the Aristotle, put out the Aristotle." Ancient sources disagree on how bad this fire was. Some say only the docks burned. Others swear thousands of scrolls went up in smoke. Plutarch, one of our main sources, says the fire spread and burned the Great Library. Strabo, who actually lived in Alexandria later, barely mentions it. So, did Caesar toast the whole thing, or just a fraction? Hard to say, but either way, thanks to Caesar's pyromaniac problem-solving, a lot of papyrus turned into ancient s'mores that day. But wait, the story doesn't end there, because the library supposedly survived, at least in part. Scholars kept working, scrolls kept being copied, knowledge still flowed. Which brings us to suspect number 2, the early Christians. Fast forward a few centuries, Rome has gone from republic to empire to we can't pay our rent anymore, and Christianity is on the rise. by the 4th century CE, Alexandria is a Christian stronghold. The problem? A lot of the scrolls in the library didn't exactly align with the new faith's worldview. Pagan rituals, magical texts, heretical philosophies, not exactly bedtime reading for a devout bishop. Q. Theophilus, Patriarch of Alexandria in 391 CE. He's on a crusade against paganism, literally. He leads mobs into temples, smashing idols, burning shrines, and in the process, possibly torching what remained of the library's pagan texts. Some accounts say the Serapeum, a temple associated with the library, was destroyed, taking thousands of scrolls with it. Others say this was exaggerated propaganda. Either way, it's another nail in the coffin of Alexandria's paper hoard. And then, a couple centuries later, suspect number 3 strolls onto the stage: the Muslims. The year is 642 CE. Alexandria falls to the armies of Caliph Omar. According to a story written centuries later, Omar supposedly declared, "If the books agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree, they are heresy. Burn them all." The scrolls, legend says, were used to fuel the city's bathhouses for 6 months. Sounds dramatic, right? The problem is, most modern historians call absolute nonsense on this tale. The story wasn't written until centuries after the supposed event, and it smells more like political smear than real history. Also, think about the logistics. 6 months of bathhouse fires? That's a lot of papyrus, and papyrus burns fast. Good luck keeping the water hot. So, if the Muslims didn't burn it, who did? The truth is, probably everyone, a little bit. Caesar burned some. Christian zealots burned some. Neglect and decay probably took the rest. Papyrus is fragile, bugs eat it, humidity destroys it, fire loves it. It doesn't take one dramatic inferno to erase a library. It just takes a few centuries of human carelessness. And maybe that's the real tragedy. The Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed in one glorious blaze. It died a slow death, piece by piece, scroll by scroll, as humanity kept proving that we're just not very good at protecting the things that matter most. Still, the mystery lingers. People love a good villain, so the arguments continue. Was it Caesar's fire, Christian mobs, a caliph's command, or just the slow grind of time? Maybe it's all of them. Maybe we'll never know. What we do know is that something irreplaceable slipped through our fingers. And that raises the million drachma question: what exactly did we lose? Because now we have to dive into the painful, tantalizing speculation. The missing cures, the lost epics, the forgotten maps. The part where humanity stares into the ashes and wonders, what brilliance did the flames devour? Imagine this: you've just spent your entire life painstakingly writing on papyrus scrolls. Your handwriting is immaculate. Your wrist hurts. Your ink-stained fingers are screaming, but you've done it. You've translated ancient Babylonian star charts, written your own treatise on medicine, maybe even drafted a comedy play that's the ancient equivalent of stand-up. You carefully roll up your scroll, kiss it like it's your baby, and deposit it in the Library of Alexandria. You think, finally, my work will be preserved forever. Fast forward a couple centuries. Poof. Gone. A random fire. A careless mob. Some bookworm beetle having a feast. Humanity basically pulled off the first accidental delete. Except this wasn't one essay. This was a massive cultural plus alt plus del on knowledge. The Library of Alexandria is what happens when you don't back up your files to Google Drive. And the loss wasn't small. Estimates say the library may have held anywhere from 40,000 to 400,000 scrolls. Some even claim 700,000, though that's probably ancient exaggeration. Even at the conservative number, that's still enough reading material to keep you busy until the end of time. Imagine a Barnes & Noble the size of a small country, except every book is handwritten, unique, and some of them are the only copies in existence. Then imagine all of that turned to ash. That's the scale of what we're talking about. So what did we lose? Let's start with science. The Greeks weren't just sitting around in togas inventing theater. They were obsessed with math, astronomy, and medicine. Take Eratosthenes, for example. This guy figured out the circumference of the Earth with a stick, a well, and a brain the size of a small planet. He did it in the 3rd century BCE. And his calculation was so close to the real number, it would make modern surveyors blush. Now imagine what other genius-level hacks were sitting in that library, waiting to be rediscovered. Were there ancient schematics for steam engines, proto-computers, lost experiments with electricity? Who knows? Medicine is another gut punch. The Greeks and Egyptians were already experimenting with surgical techniques, herbal remedies, and anatomical studies. Some of those scrolls might have contained cures or insights we didn't stumble upon again until the 19th or 20th century. It's entirely possible humanity lost centuries of medical progress to a couple of sparks in a harbor fire. Picture a scroll that casually explained germ theory sitting on a shelf while medieval Europe was still throwing leeches at every problem. And don't even get me started on literature. We know of dozens of ancient authors whose works are gone forever because later writers mentioned them, but we never found the originals. Imagine full plays of Sophocles or comedies of Menander that no one's ever read. Whole epics, forgotten myths, histories written by civilizations whose voices have been silenced. There could have been love stories funnier than Shakespeare, tragedies darker than anything Netflix churns out today, and we'll never know. Then there's geography. Ancient explorers were mapping the known world. Some claim the library held maps of lands far beyond the Mediterranean. Did it have records of Chinese voyages, Indian trade routes, maybe even Viking-like expeditions before the Vikings were a thing? Imagine if one dusty scroll had a doodle of the Americas, centuries before Columbus wandered over and asked for directions. It's not impossible. The frustrating thing is that we don't know what we don't know, which means speculation has gone absolutely wild. Some conspiracy theorists say the library held the secret to perpetual motion or blueprints for airplanes, or even contact notes from aliens. That last one's a stretch, unless aliens were really into papyrus, which doesn't seem likely. But you can see how the void left by the loss of knowledge invites every wild idea under the sun. But let's ground ourselves in reality. At minimum, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria cost humanity a colossal head start. Imagine if we'd had advanced medicine in the Middle Ages. Imagine if the Industrial Revolution happened in the year 500 instead of the 1700s. By now, maybe we'd be sipping cappuccinos on Mars instead of still struggling with traffic jams on Earth. Instead, because of a couple of ill-timed fires and centuries of neglect, we basically had to reinvent the wheel. Literally. This is why the Library of Alexandria is so haunting. It's not just about the loss of some dusty old scrolls. It's about the alternate timelines that went up in smoke. Every time you sit in traffic, every time your internet drops, every time someone tries to cure a disease with essential oils, you can thank the chain reaction that began when humanity forgot how to hang on to its most valuable data. But here's the kicker. We don't know whether the loss was quick or slow. Did a massive blaze wipe out a treasure trove in one night of chaos, or did centuries of little losses chip away until nothing was left? Was the knowledge lost like a dramatic thunderclap, or like a quiet sigh that nobody noticed until it was too late? And maybe that's why this story endures. Because if we could pinpoint exactly what was lost, the pain might be easier to bear. But not knowing, that's the real torture. It's like discovering your hard drive crashed, but you can't even remember what files were on it. Were they priceless family photos, or just a folder full of memes? Humanity will never know. And so we sit here, staring at the ashes of history, haunted by the biggest what if of them all. Because now we have to ask, in the absence of certainty, how do we humans cope? We make up wild stories, we create conspiracy theories, and we spin legends about what might have been. And that's where our tale takes its strangest turn. So, what do you do when you don't know the answer? When the world's greatest treasure trove of knowledge has gone up in smoke and no one kept the receipts? Easy. You fill in the blanks with your imagination. Humanity has been doing this since the dawn of time. Someone sees lightning and thinks, yep, that's Zeus throwing a tantrum. Someone sees the stars move and says, clearly that's a celestial cow being chased by a wolf. And when someone realizes we lost the Library of Alexandria, suddenly everyone's an expert in what must have been inside. One of the most popular theories is that the library contained technology so advanced, it would have propelled us into the space age 2,000 years early. Picture scrolls describing steam-powered machines, advanced metallurgy, or even electricity. Now, we do know that the Greeks had the Eolipoli, basically a steam turbine that they built as a novelty toy. It spun around, it hissed, people clapped politely, and then they forgot about it. But what if someone in that library had said, wait a second, what if we put this thing on wheels? Boom. Steam engines in the year 200. Industrial Revolution before the fall of Rome, trains rolling past gladiator arenas, Colosseum Wi-Fi. You get the idea. Then there are the wild medicine theories. Some imagine scrolls containing the secrets of surgery that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 1800s. Others whisper about herbal concoctions that could have cured plagues centuries early. There are even fringe claims that ancient scholars had a grasp on genetics, or at least some inkling of how heredity worked. It's tantalizing to imagine Hippocrates writing about DNA while medieval Europe was still busy blaming diseases on bad air and demons. And of course, it wouldn't be a good historical mystery without aliens. Oh yes, there's a whole subset of people who believe the Library of Alexandria held proof of extraterrestrial contact, drawings of flying machines, blueprints for impossible technologies, even star maps that might have shown civilizations beyond Earth. Personally, I like to picture an alien stopping by Alexandria, dropping off a scroll labeled "How to Build a Warp Drive for Dummies," and then watching it go up in flames a few centuries later. If that's true, then somewhere in the cosmos, extraterrestrials are laughing at us for inventing TikTok instead of teleportation. But even without aliens, there are still enough conspiracy theories to fill shelves on their own. Some say the library held lost records of Atlantis, the mythical super-civilization Plato mentioned. Others think it contained secret histories deliberately suppressed by later rulers. Maybe there were scrolls documenting the real life of Jesus, or evidence of forgotten empires we've never even heard of. Now, most historians will roll their eyes at these ideas. And fair enough, we shouldn't assume every lost text was some revolutionary blockbuster. For every groundbreaking scroll on medicine, there were probably 3 about how to properly sacrifice a goat to the moon god. Libraries always have fluff. Imagine a historian in the year 4000 discovering our archives. They'd get Einstein's theories, sure, but they'd also find 1,000 self-published vampire romance novels and 400 terabytes of cat memes. The Library of Alexandria might have been no different. But here's the thing. The not knowing is what fuels these theories. We have a black hole in history, and nature, or in this case human imagination, abhors a vacuum. So people fill it with whatever fascinates them most. Technologists dream it held schematics for machines. Doctors imagine miracle cures. Mystics see proof of hidden wisdom. And conspiracy theorists? Oh, they see everything. The irony is, the more grandiose the theories get, the more we're reminded of how fragile human knowledge really is. All it takes is one spark, one invasion, one accidental, "Oops, I spilled wine on the scroll shelf," and centuries of work disappear. And once it's gone, the mind invents. We crave closure, so we invent Atlantis, alien star charts, and lost genius. It's not just about the library anymore. It's about our deep, restless need to believe we could have been more. And that's the emotional sting, because when we speculate about what was in the Library of Alexandria, we're really speculating about ourselves. Were we robbed of greatness? Were we doomed to repeat centuries of ignorance because of one disaster? Or are we romanticizing a past that was mostly full of goat sacrifice manuals and bad poetry anyway? That tension between wonder and skepticism, hope and disappointment, is exactly what keeps the myth of Alexandria alive. And the story doesn't end with conspiracy theories, because out of those ashes came something else entirely, the rebirth of knowledge in a new form, one that would shape the future forever. But before humanity could rebuild, there was one haunting truth left behind. Even myths can't replace memory, and the legacy of Alexandria wasn't in what it held, it was in what it inspired. Which brings us to the strange, ironic afterlife of the library. So the library burned, or crumbled, or maybe just faded away like a teenager's dream of becoming a rock star. But here's the fascinating thing. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria didn't just wipe out knowledge, it lit a fire in our collective imagination. Humanity, being humanity, couldn't just let the story end with, "Well, that sucks." No, we turned Alexandria into the eternal ghost haunting the halls of history. Because here's the truth. The idea of Alexandria may have been more powerful than the actual shelves of papyrus. For centuries after its loss, Scholars, monks, and later Renaissance thinkers looked back at this mythical library as the standard for intellectual ambition. What if we could rebuild it? They asked. What if we could collect all the knowledge of the world again? It became the intellectual equivalent of Atlantis. Maybe it existed exactly as described, maybe not, but boy, it sure was inspirational. Take medieval scholars, for example. While Europe was busy having theological slap fights and inventing new ways to die of the plague, Islamic scholars in places like Baghdad and Cordoba were busy preserving and expanding much of the ancient knowledge. And guess what inspired them? That shimmering legend of Alexandria. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a massive center of learning in the 9th century, was basically a spiritual sequel. You burned down the first one? Fine, we'll build our own, with blackjack and geometry. They translated Greek, Persian, Indian, and Roman texts, keeping alive the kind of scholarship that Alexandria had once hosted. Fast forward a few more centuries, and Renaissance Europe gets in on the action. When ancient Greek texts start trickling back into Western Europe, often through those Islamic scholars, by the way, suddenly everyone is shouting rebirth, like they just rediscovered fire. Libraries pop up again, universities spread, and knowledge becomes fashionable. But always, lurking in the background, was that nagging ghost of Alexandria. Scholars kept asking themselves, are we finally rebuilding what we lost? And the irony? Oh, the irony. The library that was supposed to preserve all knowledge ends up being remembered more for its destruction than its contents. Think about it. If it had survived, maybe we'd all take it for granted. We'd roll our eyes at the shelves of scrolls, complain about the smell of papyrus, and whine about the lack of parking. But because it's gone, it's perfect, untouchable, legendary. It became the Mona Lisa of lost knowledge. Mysterious, overhyped, and endlessly debated. The myth was so strong that it didn't just inspire scholars. It inspired kings, popes, and modern nation-states. Napoleon himself, during his Egyptian campaign, supposedly waxed poetic about Alexandria and its lost library. Enlightenment thinkers brought it up as a symbol of why humanity needed reason and science. Heck, even in the 21st century, when we build massive online archives and digital libraries, we still use Alexandria as shorthand. Google Books, the new Library of Alexandria. Wikipedia, the modern Alexandria. Cloud storage, please don't burn it down this time. And this is where the real punchline lands. For all the talk about what we lost, Alexandria's greatest contribution might actually be psychological. It gave us a vision of what it means to dream big about knowledge. To hoard it, yes, but also to share it, protect it, and pass it on. The myth keeps reminding us, don't let it slip through your fingers again. But of course, this rosy afterlife comes with its own little twist. Because if the library is now more of a symbol than a real place, then the question becomes, have we already rebuilt it? With the internet, with global scholarship, with open access databases, do we already live in the dream that Alexandria hinted at? Or are we still chasing a phantom, believing there's some perfect ultimate archive out there that will finally make us wise? And that's the tricky part, because Alexandria's ghost doesn't just inspire, it taunts. Every time we lose data, every time knowledge gets locked behind paywalls, every time something important gets erased or censored, we hear the echo. Remember me? Remember how badly you screwed up last time? It's less a comforting ghost and more like a passive-aggressive roommate from history. But one thing's for sure, the legend of Alexandria didn't die in those flames. It's alive, shaping the way we think about knowledge, history, and even technology. And as we carry that myth forward, there's one final, cruel question lurking at the edge of it all. The one nobody really wants to ask, but everyone secretly wonders. What if the loss of Alexandria wasn't a tragedy at all? What if, in some strange way, it was necessary for history to unfold the way it did? Now, before you throw papyrus at me for blasphemy, let's unpack this. Losing the greatest library of the ancient world seems, at first glance, like one of history's cruelest cosmic jokes. But history, like that one sarcastic friend we all have, doesn't always play straight. Sometimes what looks like disaster in the moment turns out to be the exact mess we needed to move forward. Think about it. If Alexandria had survived, humanity might have had access to advanced astronomy, medicine, and engineering centuries earlier. Sounds amazing, right? Flying machines in the year 200, Wi-Fi in the Colosseum, sure. But here's the flip side. We humans aren't exactly famous for handling big leaps in technology responsibly. I mean, we had gunpowder and immediately thought, wow, this would look great on a battlefield. Imagine giving medieval warlords the blueprints for antibiotics, nuclear energy, or, heaven forbid, TikTok. We might not have made it this far. In a way, losing Alexandria may have forced humanity to relearn things more slowly, giving society time to mature, well, slightly. It's like history put us in a giant timeout. No, you can't have jet engines yet. First, learn not to stab each other over who gets to wear the fanciest hat. But beyond speculation, here's the undeniable truth. Alexandria's loss sparked humanity's obsession with preservation. Once knowledge slipped through our fingers, we realized how fragile it was. Monks in medieval monasteries copying texts by candlelight, Islamic scholars safeguarding Greek philosophy, Enlightenment thinkers founding libraries. All of them were driven, at least in part, by that nagging ghost. Don't lose it all again. Alexandria became less of a physical place and more of a warning label stamped onto human memory. And that legacy carried forward. Public libraries, universities, digital archives, they're all in some way descendants of that first great experiment. Every grand attempt to gather and protect knowledge has Alexandria's fingerprints on it. Even the Internet Archive today, with its Wayback Machine, feels like a direct heir. Hey, if the Library of Alexandria burned down, maybe we should save a copy of literally everything, including your embarrassing high school blog. But perhaps the most fascinating legacy isn't the libraries or the institutions. It's the idea that knowledge belongs to everyone. The Ptolemies may have started Alexandria as a vanity project, but its spirit evolved into something more democratic. Over time, the myth inspired us to think, maybe wisdom shouldn't be hoarded by kings and elites. Maybe it should be shared. And if you squint hard enough, you can see that spirit carried into the modern world, where you, sitting in your pajamas, can Google ancient Babylonian recipes or read Aristotle's works without stepping outside. And yet, even with all our progress, the shadow of Alexandria still looms. Because if history taught us one thing, it's that knowledge can still vanish. Not by fire this time, but by neglect, by censorship, by the sheer overwhelming flood of data where truth drowns in noise. The ghost keeps whispering, are you protecting what matters, or are you letting it slip again? And here's where the story takes one final turn. For thousands of years, we've mourned Alexandria as the ultimate what if. But what if it's not just a what if of the past? What if it's a prophecy of the future? A warning that even the most powerful archives, even the internet itself, could someday face its own collapse. Because if the Library of Alexandria taught us anything, it's this. Knowledge doesn't just need to be gathered, it needs to be defended. So the question we're left with is, will our own modern Alexandrias survive the test of time, or are we doomed to watch history repeat itself? So here we are. The Library of Alexandria is long gone, reduced to ashes, legend, and 1,000 what-ifs. We've spent 2 millennia crying over lost scrolls like historians at a funeral. But let's zoom out for a second. Maybe, just maybe, Alexandria's real punchline isn't about what burned, but about what it left behind. In us. Because think about it. Every time we build a new archive, every time we digitize a manuscript, every time we freak out because Wikipedia went down for 5 minutes, that's Alexandria speaking through us. We may not have saved the scrolls, but we inherited the paranoia. We are, in effect, the children of loss, running around with USB drives and cloud backups, muttering, never again. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. Humanity, for all its flaws, has this wild ability to turn disaster into drive. The same way the fall of Rome gave birth to the Renaissance, the destruction of Alexandria gave birth to our obsession with knowledge as something sacred. It turned libraries into temples, books into treasures, and nerds into guardians of civilization. Yes, you heard me right. Nerds are the reason civilization exists. Put some respect on their names. But let's not get too sentimental. because Alexandria also left us with a sense of humor about it all. It's the ultimate icebreaker in history. Whenever someone wants to sound smart at a dinner party, they sigh dramatically and say, well, of course, if the Library of Alexandria hadn't burned, we'd probably be flying to Mars by now. And everyone nods, as if the entire trajectory of human progress hinged on a few rolls of papyrus, and not say the fact that humans love stabbing each other for fun. Still, the story endures because it feels so human. We had something incredible, we lost it, and now we romanticize it endlessly. It's the same energy as losing your phone charger and suddenly realizing it was the most valuable possession you ever owned. Alexandria is basically humanity's collective "I should have appreciated it while I had it." And here's the kicker. Maybe that's the real gift. Not the scrolls, not the lost plays of Sophocles, or the secret recipes for Greek cheesecake. Though, seriously, I would kill for that one. The gift is the reminder that knowledge is fragile, that progress isn't guaranteed, that if we don't care for the things we build, they can vanish in smoke, whether it's a library, a database, or an entire civilization. So next time you walk into a library, or scroll endlessly through Wikipedia at 3 a.m., or back up your hard drive, give a little nod to Alexandria. It may be gone, but it's still with us, in the way we chase knowledge, in the way we fear losing it, and in the way we laugh at our own cosmic clumsiness. And maybe, just maybe, that's the happiest ending this tragedy could have. Not scrolls preserved in a dusty room, but a fire lit in humanity's imagination. A fire that still burns today, hopefully without any librarians running for a bucket of water. The Library of Alexandria didn't just lose knowledge. It gave us a story, a warning, and a slightly sarcastic ghost haunting us through history. And if that isn't the most human legacy ever, I don't know what is.